Welcome, everyone, to our daily broadcast on Kabbalah for Heretics. With me, your host, Yakov-Leib HaKohain. Good to see all of you listening. And just to remind everyone, we are broadcasting every weekday morning on the Zohar. Monday through Friday, we are going through the Zohar, volume by volume, page by page, sentence by sentence, and have been for more than 20 years now, literally. And doing that, we have finished and gone through volumes 1, 2, and 3. We're almost finished with volume 4, and we'll then begin volume 5. On the weekends, we have special classes. Also, every weekend, every Saturday and every Sunday. And we hope you'll also tune into those. In the meantime, let's get back to where we left off in the Zohar. Yesterday, and I believe the day before that, we have been discussing this passage in the Zohar about the blood. The blood. It says also the blood which flows from the child. That's a reference to the blood that spurts out of the child at the circumcision. The blood that comes out of the child is preserved before the Almighty. And when punishment impends over the world, God looks at that blood and delivers the world. Now let me look some more at this phrase, this passage. Let's look. Also, the blood which flows from the child, again, that is the blood which spurts out from the circumcised child at the moment of circumcision and covers the men standing closest to the child around him. That blood is the blood upon which God looks when he wants to punish the world and doesn't. But there's another thing here. There is another thing here. This answers, I think, a rather common question. What is the circumcision all about? Why? And there are lots of explanations. But if I read to you again what it says here, I think a really powerful explanation emerges. It says, also, the blood which flows from the child is preserved before the Almighty at the time of circumcision. The circumcision is a form of sacrifice to God. It is recreating the sacrifice of the Messiah on the cross by which his blood was spilt and covered the world to save it. The goal of the circumcision is more to receive the blood than for that child to be marked by the Brit Milah. Are you listening? If, as this suggests, but it is not sufficient for the individual, for us. For that, the circumcision of the heart is necessary. The circumcision of the heart fulfills the circumcision of the flesh. The blood of the Messiah is poured out during the circumcision of the flesh and preserved before God Almighty. And the circumcision of the heart is an opening to and an awareness of that truth. It activates the circumcision of the flesh. The circumcision of the flesh is the virtual re-sacrifice of the Messiah, whose blood is spilt for the salvation of the world, it is a recreation of that with the blood of the child, representing that blood of the Messiah. Because that tells us that that cutting off of the foreskin is a sacrifice. It is not surgical. It is not just to remove the foreskin. It is to perform a version of the sacrifice that was made by the Messiah on the cross, as it were, when his blood was spilt also. Now, there are various explanations other than that for the circumcision. None of them, I think, are as satisfying as what I just gave you. One is that he is marked thereby on his flesh as a member of Israel. Why? I mean, why marked there? Another reason given is because it's done for sanitary reasons. Because the foreskin collects, I believe it's called smegma, which is nasty stuff. But that's a ridiculous explanation as well. It has nothing to do with health, with physical health. Because if it did, now listen carefully to what I'm going to say. If it did, for these thousands of years that the Jewish men have been circumcised and the Gentile men have not, you would expect the Jews to outlive the Gentiles. You would expect the Gentiles to be dropping like flies if indeed the circumcision were a health measure done only among the Jews. Those of you who are listening here at the recording session, raise your hand if I'm being really clear about this. The only... Excellent, good. Thank you. Thank you. The only, I think, satisfactory explanation is the one I gave, which is a more hidden explanation, in which you have to go deep into the Zohar and to what it's talking about in order to see it. That circumcision, that cutting off of the foreskin, is a form of blood sacrifice to recreate the blood sacrifice of the Messiah in order to again receive the redemptive blood. That's why the old men gather close to the child being circumcised, so they will become splattered with that blood. And that's the truth. Anybody who has grown up in an Orthodox Jewish community knows that to be true. Again, the way in which these things are trivialized by the descendants of Esau and many of the so-called descendants of Jacob is to say, oh, those are only health measures. Again, I have to ask you, if that were so, then for the thousands of years that the Jews have been circumcising their men and the Gentiles have not, you would expect the Gentiles to be dropping like flies, which they haven't. Their numbers have simply grown. It has nothing to do with health. It's very much like people who say, oh, I know the laws of kashrut. I know the laws of kosher. Well, what are they? Well, you mustn't mix milk and meat. I said, is that all? I say. Oh, yeah, well, that's it. I know the laws. I said, well, then let me ask you something. If you know so well, and it was just a matter of health. I remember my father telling me that one time when I was very young. He was not a religious man. But what my answer to these people is to ask them a question. I'll say, all right, it's only a matter of health, keeping kosher. Let me ask you, are insects kosher? Are insects kosher? Now, what they'll normally say is, sure, that's not milk and meat. And the answer is, no, insects are not kosher. They are not to be eaten, except for the grasshopper, the locust. That may be eaten. Can you tell me the difference between the grasshopper and other insects that makes the grasshopper a health measure, but the other insects not? Are you following me? We must understand that these things were done for theurgic reasons, not to be dismissed as simply matters of health or hygiene. In the first place, of course, circumcision, which we're talking about here, but also with the laws of kosher. Again, if it were so unhealthy to eat pork, the Gentiles should have been dropping like flies over the past 2,000 years, and not the Jews, because we didn't eat pork. In our understanding of these things, there are several things we must not do. We must not dismiss them out of hand as mere rituals. We must not do that. When it suits the Gentile Christian, they do. They talk about it as simple legalisms. We don't need to do that anymore. Well, that's possibly so. But they're not legalisms. They were not done for legalistic ritual reasons. They were done for deeply theurgic reasons. That's first of all. We don't have to look at them as being actually happening, by the way. And that's the second point. We do not have to think of them as literally taking place, but what they symbolize and continue to symbolize by their implementation over the generations. And finally, that this implementation, this recreation, in this case of the sacrifice of the Messiah and his blood, this recreation is recreated with every circumcision of every male child at 8 days, so that its blood may be upon the Jews just as the blood of the Messiah was upon the Jews, and just as the Jews said, let his blood be on us. In fact, we want his blood to be on us so much that even after he's long gone, when a male child is being circumcised, we will accept that blood as a replacement for his blood. Why do I keep stressing this, you might ask? And typically people do, but typically the people who say, well, why do you keep repeating that, are the ones who don't get what I'm saying. Especially about the circumcision and the blood of the sacrificed Messiah. Every newborn, every 8-day-old child, male child, is a stand-in for the sacrifice of the Messiah, the blood sacrifice of the Messiah, by which, again, the blood sacrifice of the Messiah is poured out upon Israel. And again, it relates directly to the terrible lie that Gentile Christians have been telling for 2,000 years, and that is when Pontius Pilate asks the Jews, shall I circumcise him? They say, let his blood be on us. Indeed. But that is not a statement on their part of their guilt. They're saying exactly what we see, that yes, let his blood be on us as a fulfillment of himself. And just as the blood of a newborn baby boy will be on us, we will seek it out for our salvation. Let his blood be on us. I hope you understand. Gentile Christians always interpret that statement on the part of the Jews at the time of the circumcision as being an admission of their guilt and hostility toward Jesus. That statement, let his blood be on us, is taken by them to mean the Jews are saying, circumcise him, get rid of him, and let his blood be on us. We are to blame for it. That's not what is coming down at that moment, everybody. Listen to what I'm saying. Now, of course, Gentile Christians are not going to want to accept that. I mean, it's hard to reject something you've believed for 2,000 years, and more than that, something you believe that reinforces your argument against the Jew. Whereas this explanation reinforces the argument that the Jews participated knowingly and intentionally in the sacrifice of Jesus, the man on the cross, in order to fulfill his mission as the Messiah. Over and over said, until I die, I cannot fulfill my mission. Now, Gentile Christians are very quick to acknowledge that, but he does. He says it in many places. Well, if that's the case, if he could not fulfill his mission unless he died, those Jews were aiding him in fulfilling that mission by encouraging his circumcision, by encouraging his death. Listen to me. I go into this in great detail in my essay, To Die for the People, which was written, 15, 20 years ago, and published in a major Roman Catholic journal of theology. Even Judas, therefore, can be seen as cooperating with Jesus to make his crucifixion happen, because without that crucifixion, in Jesus' own words, he could not fulfill his mission. His mission was to die on the cross and shed his blood for the salvation of the world, just as the lamb was sacrificed on the altar of the temple, and whose blood was spewed out upon the world. The greatest and last sacrifice. Well, Judas can be seen as participating in that. In fact, Jesus says to Judas as he leaves, go now and do what you must do. Go now and do what you must do. Look in your Gospels. That's what he says to him. Thus strongly suggesting that this is all prearranged. That Judas, and by the way, Judas means Jew, Judah, Yehuda, Yid. This suggests that he and Jesus planned this out before the betrayal in order that Jesus might be captured, found guilty, and crucified and die on the cross in order to fulfill his mission. A totally Jewish point of view. Read my essay. It's on our website, Dunmo West website. To Die for the People. Again, that was published in a major Roman Catholic journal of theology called The Priest. Now, let me, again, as an aside to that, the reaction by the priests, by all the readers of that journal, was silence. Not one response to that article. Not one. Now, wait a minute. If that article were, as you might think, so blasphemous, and if that article were, in its conclusions, so contradictory to the Christian belief of the death of Jesus, you would have expected some angry letters from priests denouncing it. There were none. The denunciation was a way of minimizing it, of getting it out of the way, of meeting it with silence. Because if that silence were disapproval, there would be no silence. There would have been letters objecting to the publication of that essay. I mean, a kind of backup to that is, I published many years even before that, the first major essay that actually analyzed Jung. I analyzed Jung's dreams that he reports elsewhere. And that was published in a major, leading Jungian journal, the Journal of the C.G. Jung Institute of San Francisco. Now, in that case, the objections were incredible. The letters to the editor were flooded with objections, so much so that they dedicated the whole next issue of that journal, following the issue that published my essay. They devoted the entire next issue to articles about my essay. Now, that's the kind of reaction you would have expected among the priests if they disapproved of my essay on Jesus and the death of Jesus. It was not. It was silence. Again, just to make sure, how many of you who are here to just listen to the recording session understand what I'm saying? You've not heard this before, unless it's been from me. You're not going to hear this from anyone else, except from me. And you can dismiss it. And I know there are many, many in the listening audience who are dismissing what I'm saying out of hand. And that's their right. But the problem is they're dismissing it before they really hear it and before they really understand it. I'm not just creating this off the top of my head. I'm giving you scripture and biblical historical evidence for what I'm saying, even more so in my essay. So Rabbi Shimon expounded the words, quote, "If not for my covenant day and night," etc., from Jeremiah. And he said of that, there are two crowns linked together, they being the gateway to all other crowns. One is Gevura, the left-hand side of the 10 Sephiros, and the other is Chesed, mercy. This is speaking directly to the two active sides of God. Not just that God creates evil as well as good, but that God is evil as well as good. And the source of our sin comes from God, who leads us into that sin and then punishes us for sinning. Well, why does he do that? Because he is, as the Gnostics clearly pointed out, and as I believe Jung has pointed out, and I have pointed out, a crazy God. Oh, that really is blasphemous. Well, maybe so. But still, one moment God is kicking the shit out of you, and the next moment he's putting Band-Aids all over you from where he injured you. The mind of God is a duality. The mind of God is torn between love and hate. That's the two crowns. The side of evil is Gevura, the left-hand side, translated as justice. The side of holiness and good and love is Chesed, translated as mercy or love. Both are sides of the same God. And it is the interaction in God, this bipolar reaction in God, that determines how it is he reacts to us, or it reacts to us. And there's no way to know that unpredictability. God is unpredictable. God is capricious. The Hindus have a word for it. They call it the Leela of God. The game playing of God. God plays games with us for his own satisfaction. There's no way to predict that. Well, what shall I do when God is in fact accosting me, as he did Job? Well, you do what Job did. You don't pray that God should stop accosting you. Oh God, have mercy on me. Oh God, love me. Oh God, don't do this to me. I love you. I praise you. Oh God, be merciful. That's not what you do. That's not what Job did. What Job did was he realized and confesses to God, you are a God of two crowns, he says, finally. He acknowledges that God is evil as well as good. In the last passages of Job, Job finally confesses to God, I am the man who obscured your designs with my empty-headed words. I knew you before only by hearsay, but now, having seen you with my own eyes, I know what you are, and in dust and ashes I repent. That's what we do when God has beaten the shit out of us. We acknowledge to him, we understand that it's he who is doing it. And we love him and confess that love of him even so. Not just in order to get him to stop, but because you really mean it. When I went through my massive Job experience, which, like all Job experiences, almost killed me, I loved God. I realized where it was coming from. But I loved God anyway, and I really did. I didn't say or tell myself I loved God to get him to stop. That's the reaction when you're being afflicted by disease, by poverty, by war, by whatever. If you don't understand that, you do not understand what it is I've come to teach. Or if you say you understand it, but then you'll say, oh yeah, but I do it with slight revisions of mine. You're not doing it. You're doing what you think is this tikkun of God, not what I'm telling you is the neo-sabbatian tikkun. So don't blame me and the teachings if God really kicks you out. You're not doing what is prescribed to be done in order to cope with whatever affliction God is afflicting you with. It's like the woman who's baking a cake and the recipe says 2 cups of sugar. Oh, I'll put in 3. I'm following the recipe. 2 tablespoons of baking soda. She puts in 4 because she thinks that would be better. The cake turns out like shit. And her family says to her, what is this cake? Why is it so horrible? She says, I don't know. I followed the recipe. It's the recipe that's wrong. I hope to God this is getting through to you. All of you out there listening. I'm not asking you to agree with it. I'm asking you, number one, to shut the hell up and listen to it. Just listen. Without inner commentary. Secondly, understand it. First listen. Then really hear it, pardon me. And then hearing it, understand it. And then understanding it, decide whether you agree or disagree with it. But don't disagree with it before you have even heard it, before you have even allowed yourself to listen to it, which is what most people do. Don't be the woman baking the cake. Don't say you're following the recipe when in fact you are not. You haven't even heard the recipe yet, let alone understand it. You think you can do whatever you want with it. And then when it doesn't turn out, the cake is bad, you blame the recipe. No. Blame yourself. Oh my God, is he telling us self-blame? Yeah, I realize that's not very popular among the New Age woo-woos. But yes, when something is wrong, goes wrong, you're going to blame the other anyway. Better that you should truthfully blame yourself. If you're going to cast blame, don't do it as you typically will do it, on the teacher or the teachings. Blame yourself for not really listening to, hearing, and understanding those teachings, and thinking you were doing them even when you were not. And therefore it was the recipe that's to blame for the bad cake, not you. If not for my covenant day and night, when we are conscious and we are unconscious, both in darkness and in light, that covenant, the covenant of the circumcision of the heart, that operates both day and night, and if not for that, man would be dead, condemned. He says, there are two crowns linked together, they being the gateway to all the other crowns. In God, there are two crowns upon, if you will, a two-headed God. The right-hand head of God, where's the crown of chesed, mercy? The left-hand head of God, where's the crown of gevurah, anger and unholiness? And they both interact with each other. And if there were only one and not the other, things would not be for us as they should be. There are two crowns, and both are the gateway to all other crowns. The crown of evil on the head of God is as much a gateway to God as the crown of mercy and love and holiness. Listen, it's saying that. There are two crowns. Each is a gateway to all the other crowns of God. And furthermore, one is just gevurah and the other is mercy. One is male and one is female. One white and one red. We'll take a really good look at that in tomorrow morning's program. I hope to God you've been listening to this morning's program, because these words are not my words. These interpretations are not my interpretations. What I speak does not come from me. It is not for my glory or honor that they are being spoken, but for that of God's. Let those who have ears hear. What do you think he was referring to? Let those who have ears hear. Baruch Hashem, Amen. We'll continue with this in tomorrow morning's program. Please do tune us in. In the meantime now, any of the few of you who have come to the recording session to ask questions or make comments, if you have a question or a comment, please raise your hand. Yeshai, go ahead. Belteshazzar, go ahead. David has told us that he is trying to divide his time between listening and working, so I understand. But Yeshai and Belteshazzar, go, please. Waiting. And of course, Yeshai, you'll cut out these long pauses from the posted podcast. Thank you. Belteshazzar, powerful shear absorbed into the soul. The red and white remind me of when Jacob Frank dressed in red and white. Absolutely, that's why he did. Absolutely. And notice, it's red and white, not black and white, but red and white. Did you all notice that? That's significant. We'll talk more about that tomorrow. Thank you, Belteshazzar. Great comment. Yeshai, go ahead. If you finish Belteshazzar, just take down your hand. If not, if you want to say some more, by all means, leave your hand up. Okay. Thank you for that wonderful comment. Yeshai, go ahead. I love that you likened it to Frank, and indeed that's so. And indeed that's the reason. Frank was a living embodiment of the Zohar. In fact, they were called and called themselves Zoharists. They did not follow the written Torah. They followed only the Zohar, the oral Torah. So that's a great, apt comment you made, Belteshazzar. Yeshai, go ahead. There we go. Yeshai, extremely powerful. Good, thank you. The Holy Spirit shaking me and bringing tears. The circumcision of the flesh is a theurgic act of sacrifice, a participation of taking the blood of Messiah taken on the Jews in present, as the Jews participated in the sacrifice of Yeshua. Absolutely. And one must recognize and enter through the two crowns of God. It's two sides, being evil and good. Again, let me point out, Jesus says when they ask him how to pray, Our Father who art in heaven, lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Why would he ask God not to lead them into temptation if it weren't for that God leads us into temptation and then punishes us for it? Both sides of God being good and evil. Loving God as giver of suffering in the moment as well as a giver of love. Absolutely. Right on the button. Right on the money. Thank you, both of you. I hope that the listening audience caught all that also. Baruch Hashem, please God. Well, but the fact is, I must say, if it's the will of God that they don't catch it, then they won't catch it. If it's the will of God that they do catch it, they will catch it. Notice Jesus says, let those who have ears hear, suggesting that you're either born with ears or not. But it's not a matter of your choice. Do you see? All right. God bless you all.